Alphonse Gabriel, Great Al Capone, was an American gangster of Italian descent who operated in Chicago in the 1920s and 1930s. Under the guise of the furniture business and dry cleaning, he was engaged in the underground production and sale of alcoholic beverages, trafficking in contraband goods in the United States, casinos, pimping, and charity. He opened a network of free canteens for his unemployed fellow citizens, a prominent representative of organized crime in the United States during the era of Prohibition and the Great Depression, which originated and existed there under the influence of the Italian mafia, as well as the head of its Chicago branch. Capone was born in Brooklyn on January 17, 1899, the fourth child in his family. The parents were Italian immigrants who came to the United States in 1894. His father was a hairdresser, his mother a seamstress. In total, they had 9 children. From the age of 11, Capone showed signs of being clearly an excitable psychopath. Ultimately, at the age of 14, he attacked his school teacher, after which he dropped out of school and did odd jobs for some time, after which he fell under the influence of gangster Johnny Torrio and joined his James Street gang, which later joined the famous gang Five Corners. The oversized teenager Capone was hired as a bouncer at a billiards club. Due to his physical strength and size, Capone enjoyed doing this work in his boss's squalid Yale establishment. Addicted to playing billiards, he won absolutely every tournament held in Brooklyn within a year. It is to this period of his life that historians attribute Capone's stabbing with criminal Frank Galluccio. The quarrel arose over his sister, to whom Capone made an impudent remark. Galluccio slashed the young Capone across the face with a knife, leaving him with the famous scar on his left cheek that earned Capone the nickname Scarface in chronicles and pop culture. In 1917, Capone was closely interested in the New York police. He was suspected of involvement in at least 2 murders, which gave him a reason to follow Torrio to Chicago and join the gang of Big Colosimo, the owner of several brothels and Torrio's uncle. During this period, there was a dispute between Colosimo and Torrio about expanding the scope of activity through bootlegging. Torrio was in favor, Colosimo was against. The greedy and unprincipled Torrio, having exhausted all arguments, decided to eliminate the intractable relative, and Capone supported him. On December 4, 1918, Capone had a son, and on December 30th, Capone got married. In the bootlegging business, the Torrio gang encountered fierce competition. Over the course of several years, many people died, and among them was Capone's younger brother. Torrio was seriously wounded in the shootout, forcing him to retire and appoint Al Capone as his successor. At that time, the gang had about 1,000 fighters who collected $300,000 a week. The mafia began to exploit prostitution, and all this was covered by huge bribes paid to Capone, not only by police officers, but also by politicians. The war of bandits under Capone took on proportions unprecedented for that time. Between 1924 and 1929 alone, more than 500 mobsters were shot and killed in Chicago. Capone mercilessly exterminated the Irish gangs, using machine guns, and hand grenades in shootouts. To hide the origin of his income, he opened a large network of laundries in the United States and declared his criminal proceeds as income from laundries. This is where the expression money laundering came from. Members of the Capone gang, wearing Chicago police uniforms, burst into a garage where a rival Irish gang had set up a warehouse of smuggled whiskey. The men of the enemy gang raised their hands, convinced of the authenticity of the police. They obediently lined up against the wall, but instead of the expected search, shots were fired. 7 people were killed. The published photographs from the crime scene shocked the public and significantly damaged Capone's reputation in society, and also forced federal law enforcement agencies to closely investigate his activities. In July 1931, Capone was tried in federal court, and in May 1932, he was sentenced to 11 years in the Atlanta House of Correction for failing to pay $388,000 in taxes. While in prison, Capone worked in a shoe shop for 8 hours a day. In 1934, he was transferred to a prison on Alcatraz Island. On June 23, 1936, Capone was stabbed there by prisoner James Lucas. At Alcatraz, his mental health increasingly deteriorated, and he spent the last year of his sentence in a prison hospital. Due to his health, his sentence was reduced, and on January 6, 1939, he was released from prison and transferred to the California Federal Correctional Institution at Terminal Island to serve a sentence for contempt of court, from where he was released on November 16th of the same year. After his release, Capone was sent to a Baltimore hospital for treatment of paresis, which made it difficult for Capone to move, but they refused to admit him because of his reputation. Capone was eventually admitted to Union Memorial Hospital. Within weeks, Capone never recovered and went to join his wife and son at the family mansion in Florida. In 1946, his doctor and a psychiatrist from Baltimore conducted an examination and concluded that Capone had the psyche and mind of a 12-year-old child. On January 21, 1947, Capone suffered a stroke, from which he recovered, but was then diagnosed with pneumonia. On January 2010, he suffered cardiac arrest, and on January 25, 1947, Capone died in his home, surrounded by his family.